When royal guards of Britain lost, a morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant Michael Thompson adjusted his red tunic for the 100th time that week. 23 years of service had taught him that perfection was not just expected, it was demanded. Every button polished, every crease razor-sharp, every movement calculated to maintain the dignity of the crown. But nothing in his extensive training had prepared him for what was about to unfold on this seemingly ordinary Tuesday in September. Michael had joined the Queen's Guard straight from military college, drawn by the prestige and tradition that came with protecting the British royal family. His father had served before him and his grandfather before that. It was more than a job. It was a calling that ran through his bloodline like ancient oak roots. The red tunic, the iconic bearskin hat, the unwavering stance, these were symbols of an unbreakable commitment to duty above all else. Standing at attention beside the palace gates, Michael watched the familiar rhythm of tourist cameras clicking and children pointing excitedly at the motionless guards. He had long since learned to tune out the constant chatter, the occasional attempt by visitors to make him laugh or flinch, and the endless speculation about whether the guards were real people or elaborate statues. His training had conditioned him to become a living monument, as immovable as the stone lions that flanked the palace entrance. The other guards in his unit shared this same dedication. There was James, a soft-spoken man from Wales who could stand motionless for hours while mentally composing letters to his young daughter. Sarah, one of the first female guards to join their ranks, possessed a focus so intense that pigeons had once nested in the folds of her tunic without her moving a muscle. And David, the youngest of their group, who treated each shift like a sacred meditation, finding peace in the absolute stillness that their duty required. What tourists and onlookers never realized was the incredible mental discipline required to maintain such composure. It wasn't just about standing still, it was about becoming invisible while remaining completely present. They were trained to observe everything: suspicious movements in the crowd, changes in the weather that might affect security protocols, the subtle hand signals from their superiors that could indicate anything from a shift change to an emergency evacuation. The irony was that beneath those stoic exteriors beat hearts, full of the same emotions that moved every other human being. Michael had stood at attention during his own mother's funeral, granted leave only to attend the service but not to show grief publicly while in uniform. James had received news of his promotion to father while on duty, forced to contain his joy until his shift ended hours later. Sarah had learned of her brother's safe return from Afghanistan through a whispered message from a fellow guard, and had to maintain her composure despite tears of relief threatening to spill. But the royal family understood this sacrifice in ways that the public never could. Queen Elizabeth herself had often acknowledged the personal cost of such dedicated service, sometimes offering subtle nods of appreciation or ensuring that special accommodations were made for guards facing family emergencies. Prince Philip had been known to share quiet jokes with guards during private moments, recognizing their humanity behind the ceremonial facade. The palace walls had witnessed countless moments of history, from declarations of war to announcements of peace, from royal weddings to state funerals. Through it all, the guards had remained steadfast, their presence a constant reminder of stability and continuity in an ever-changing world. They were trained to be invisible witnesses to history, present but not participating, observing but not reacting. As Michael stood in position that morning, he noticed an unusual flurry of activity within the palace grounds. Staff members moved with a particular urgency he had learned to recognize over the years, the kind of purposeful haste that indicated something significant was happening. Radio chatter among the security team had been more frequent than usual, though he couldn't make out the specific details from his position. The tourists seemed oblivious to these subtle changes, continuing their photo sessions and animated discussions about the guards' uniforms. Children pressed their faces against the iron railings, trying to catch a glimpse of any movement that might prove the guards were real people, rather than elaborate mannequins. Their innocent curiosity never failed to amuse Michael, though his expression remained as unchanging as carved marble. What none of the guards could have anticipated was that their legendary composure, built through years of rigorous training and unwavering discipline, was about to be tested in ways that went far beyond their physical endurance or mental focus. The events that were beginning to unfold within the palace walls would challenge not just their professional stoicism, but their very humanity. The morning progressed with its usual routine of shift changes, security briefings, and the endless parade of tourists, but beneath this veneer of normalcy, something was stirring that would forever change how these dedicated guardsmen viewed their role. Forces beyond their control were aligning to create moments so profound, so emotionally charged, that even their legendary training would prove insufficient to maintain their stoic facades. As the clock tower chimed 11, marking another hour of their unwavering vigil, none of the guards could have imagined that by day's end, the world would witness something unprecedented, the moment when duty and humanity collided in the most unexpected way, revealing the beating hearts beneath those famous red tunics. The stage was set for an emotional journey that would test every principle they had been taught about service, sacrifice, and the true meaning of honor. In the hours to come, these guardians of tradition would discover that sometimes the greatest act of duty is not to remain unmoved, but to allow the world to see that beneath the ceremonial armor lived souls capable of profound compassion and genuine human connection. All forbearance with impolite travelers. The first crack in their stoic armor came from an unexpected source, an 8-year-old girl named Emma, whose boundless enthusiasm for the royal guards had captured the attention of palace staff over the past month. Unlike the typical tourists who snapped photos and moved on, Emma had become a regular fixture outside the gates, arriving each morning with her grandmother before school to wave at what she called her special soldiers. Emma suffered from a rare form of childhood, leukemia that had already claimed most of her hair and much of her energy, but her spirit remained unbreakably bright. She wore a small knitted hat that her grandmother had made, decorated with tiny embroidered crowns that sparkled in the morning light. Her daily ritual involved standing as tall as her small frame would allow, offering a perfect military salute to each guard on duty, and whispering words of encouragement that somehow carried across the courtyard. Despite her weakened voice, what had started as a charming distraction had evolved into something much more meaningful for the guards. Michael found himself unconsciously adjusting his schedule to ensure he was positioned where Emma could see him during her morning visits. James had taken to polishing his buttons with extra care, knowing that Emma would inspect their uniforms with the serious attention of a seasoned military inspector. Even Sarah, typically focused solely on security protocols, had begun to appreciate the pure joy that Emma brought to their otherwise solemn duties. The palace staff had also taken notice of this special relationship. Kitchen workers began timing their outdoor tasks to coincide with Emma's visits, and even some of the more senior household members found reasons to pass by the windows overlooking the courtyard during her morning appearances. Word of the brave little girl who saluted the guards had quietly spread throughout the palace, creating an unofficial network of people who had become invested in her daily routine. Emma's grandmother, Margaret, was a retired teacher who understood the power of routine and purpose in helping her granddaughter cope with the brutal treatments and uncertain prognosis. The daily visits to see the guards had become more than just entertainment. They were a source of strength and normalcy in a world that had been turned upside down by hospital visits and medical procedures that no child should have to endure. During one particularly difficult week when Emma's chemotherapy treatments had left her too weak to make the journey to the palace, Margaret had called the palace's public relations office to explain their absence. The message had made its way through the staff hierarchy with unusual speed, eventually reaching the guards themselves through informal channels. For the first time in years, Michael found himself genuinely concerned about someone outside the royal family while on duty. The guards had developed subtle ways of acknowledging Emma's presence without breaking protocol. A barely perceptible nod when she arrived, a slight adjustment of posture that she interpreted as recognition, or the timing of their ceremonial movements to coincide with her visits. These tiny gestures meant the world to Emma, who had begun to view the guards not just as tourist attractions, but as friends who stood watch over her daily struggles. With the same dedication they brought to protecting the royal family, what none of the guards fully understood was how profoundly Emma's situation was affecting the royal family itself. Queen Elizabeth had been quietly observing these interactions from her private apartments, touched by the genuine connection that had developed between this courageous child and her guards. Prince William and Catherine had also heard about Emma through palace staff and had begun making discreet inquiries about her condition and treatment. The morning that would change everything began like any other, with Emma arriving at her usual time despite the visible toll that her latest round of treatments had taken. Her knitted hat seemed too large for her increasingly fragile frame, and her grandmother had to help support her as she stood to offer her customary salute. But her smile remained as bright as ever, and her voice, though weaker, still carried the same note of admiration when she whispered her morning greetings to her soldiers. Michael watched from his position as Emma struggled to maintain her salute, her small arm trembling with the effort. For the first time in his career, he felt his professional composure wavering. The sight of this brave child fighting her own battle while still finding the strength to honor theirs struck him with unexpected force. He could see similar struggles playing out on the faces of his fellow guards, their legendary discipline challenged by waves of emotion they had never been trained to handle. What happened next would be talked about in palace circles for years to come. As Emma finished her salute and began to turn away, her legs gave out beneath her. Margaret caught her granddaughter before she could fall, but the incident sent a ripple of concern through everyone who had been watching. The guards remained at their posts, but every one of them felt the urge to break ranks and rush to help. It was in that moment of crisis that something extraordinary occurred. Queen Elizabeth herself appeared in the courtyard, having witnessed the scene from her window. Without fanfare or ceremony, she walked directly to where Emma sat recovering on a bench, her grandmother hovering anxiously beside her. The Queen knelt down to Emma's level, speaking quietly with the child while palace medical staff discreetly assessed her condition. The guards watched in amazement as their sovereign, the woman they had sworn to protect, knelt on the cobblestones to comfort a sick child. It was a moment that redefined their understanding of true nobility, one that had nothing to do with titles or ceremonies but everything to do with compassion and human kindness. For men and women trained to remain unmoved by even the most significant events, this display of genuine care was more moving than any state ceremony they had ever witnessed. Emma's face lit up with wonder as she realized who was speaking to her. Despite her weakness, she attempted another salute, which the Queen gently discouraged, instead taking the child's small hand in her own. Their conversation was too quiet for the guards to hear, but the genuine warmth in both faces was unmistakable. This was not a photo opportunity or a planned public relations moment. It was one human being reaching out to comfort another in a time of need. The conversation between Queen Elizabeth and Emma lasted only a few minutes, but its impact would resonate far beyond those precious moments in the courtyard. The Queen spoke to Emma with the same gentle attention she might give to her own great-grandchildren, asking about her treatments, her favorite subjects in school, and her dreams for the future. Emma, despite her weakness, answered with the honest directness that only children possess, telling the Queen about her wish to become a soldier like the guard she admired so much. What happened next would be remembered as one of the most extraordinary breaches of protocol in modern royal history. The Queen stood up and walked directly to where Sergeant Michael Thompson stood at attention. For a moment he thought he was about to be reprimanded for some unknown violation of duty. Instead, the Queen spoke quietly to him, her words carrying a request that would test every principle of his training. "Sergeant Thompson," she said, her voice warm but serious, "I believe young Emma deserves a proper military honor. Would you be so kind as to organize a small ceremony for our brave little soldier?" Michael's mind raced as he processed the request. A ceremony was not something that could be improvised. It required coordination, approval through proper channels, and careful adherence to military protocol. But looking into the Queen's eyes and then glancing at Emma, who was watching hopefully from her bench, he realized that some things transcended standard operating procedures. "It would be my honor." "Your Majesty," Michael replied, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil he was experiencing. "Might I suggest we assemble the guard in formation for a special recognition?" The Queen nodded approvingly, and Michael used hand signals to communicate with his fellow guards. What followed was a display of military precision that served an entirely different purpose than usual. James, Sarah, and David moved into formation with their characteristic efficiency, but there was something different in their bearing, a sense of purpose that went beyond routine duty. Emma watched in wonder as the guards arranged themselves in a perfect line facing her bench, Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, overwhelmed by the kindness being shown to her granddaughter. Palace staff had gathered at windows and doorways, many of them fighting back tears as they witnessed this unprecedented display of compassion. The Queen returned to Emma's side and gently helped her to stand. "Emma," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard, "your daily courage and dedication to honoring these guards has not gone unnoticed. Today, they would like to honor you in return." Michael stepped forward and, in a clear, strong voice that carried years of military authority, called out commands that had never been used in quite this context before. "Queen's Guard, attention! Present arms." The guards moved in perfect synchronization, their ceremonial rifles brought to the precise angle required for the highest military honors. But it was what happened next that broke through their stoic training in the most beautiful way possible. As Emma attempted to stand at attention to receive this honor, her small body swayed with exhaustion. Without thinking, without considering protocol or consequences, Michael stepped out of formation and walked to her side. He knelt down next to her bench and, in a voice filled with genuine respect, said, "Private Emma, you may receive your honor seated. You've earned that right through your service to morale and courage." The other guards watched as their sergeant's composure finally cracked, revealing the human heart beneath the ceremonial uniform. Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes as she watched Emma's face light up with joy. James struggled to maintain his grip on his rifle as emotion threatened to overwhelm him. David, the youngest of the group, found himself smiling despite every rule he had learned about maintaining neutral expressions. Emma's response was what finally shattered their remaining composure. Despite her weakness, she managed to raise her small hand in the most perfect salute any of them had ever seen. Her voice, though barely above a whisper, carried clearly across the suddenly silent courtyard as she said, "Thank you for protecting everyone, including me." That was the moment when years of training simply ceased to matter. Michael felt tears streaming down his face as he returned Emma's salute with military precision. Sarah openly wept while maintaining her position, her body shaking with emotion she could no longer contain. James removed his bearskin hat entirely, a breach of protocol that would normally result in severe consequences, but which felt like the only appropriate response to such profound courage. The Queen watched with evident approval as her guards revealed their humanity. This was not a failure of duty, but rather its highest expression, the recognition that true service sometimes means allowing others to see not just your strength, but your capacity for compassion. The tourists and onlookers who had gathered were witnessing something unprecedented, the moment when the famous Stoic guards of Buckingham Palace showed the world that beneath their ceremonial, armor-beat hearts capable of profound love and respect. Palace photographers who had been discreetly documenting the scene captured images that would later become treasured, not for their historical significance, but for their demonstration of pure human kindness. The pictures showed guards with tears in their eyes, a queen kneeling beside a sick child, and a little girl whose courage had managed to touch the hearts of people trained to remain untouchable. As the ceremony concluded, Michael realized that he and his fellow guards had just experienced something that would forever change how they approached their duties. They had discovered that true strength sometimes meant vulnerability, that real courage involved not just physical bravery but emotional honesty, and that the highest form of service was not just protecting people's bodies, but honoring their spirits. Emma was helped back to her bench by both her grandmother and the Queen, while the guards slowly returned to their positions. But something fundamental had shifted in the courtyard of Buckingham Palace that day. The barriers between duty and compassion, between protocol and humanity, had been broken down by a little girl's courage and a queen's wisdom. The days following Emma's ceremony brought unexpected changes to the atmosphere around Buckingham Palace. Word of what had happened spread quietly through London's tight-knit community, not through official channels or media reports, but through the whispered conversations of palace staff, the emotional testimonies of witnesses, and the gradual realization that something truly special had occurred within those ancient walls. Michael found himself struggling with emotions he had never experienced during his decades of service. The image of Emma's perfect salute haunted his quiet moments, and he discovered that maintaining his stoic composure had become exponentially more difficult. During routine duties, he would catch himself scanning the crowds for familiar faces, hoping to see Emma's bright smile and carefully knitted hat among the sea of tourists and royal watchers. The other guards were experiencing similar challenges. Sarah had always prided herself on her ability to compartmentalize her emotions, a skill that had served her well as one of the few women in their ranks. But now she found herself thinking about her own nieces and nephews, wondering if she had been so focused on duty that she had missed opportunities to show them the kind of kindness the Queen had demonstrated to Emma. James discovered that his letters to his daughter had taken on a new tone. Where once he had written about the honor and tradition of his service, he now found himself describing the importance of compassion and the courage it takes to care about others. His young daughter's responses had grown more thoughtful too, as if she sensed the change in her father's perspective even across the miles that separated them. David, the youngest member of their unit, had been particularly affected by the ceremony. As someone still establishing his identity as a guard, he had looked up to his more experienced colleagues as examples of perfect military bearing. But witnessing their emotional responses to Emma had taught him that true strength included the capacity for genuine human connection, not just physical endurance and mental discipline. The Queen herself had not forgotten about Emma either. Through discreet channels, she had ensured that the child's medical team had access to the best specialists available, and that Margaret never had to worry about transportation to and from the hospital during Emma's most difficult treatment periods. These acts of kindness were never publicized, never turned into photo opportunities, but they represented the same genuine care that had prompted the impromptu ceremony in the courtyard. Emma's condition had been improving slowly, thanks in part to the experimental treatment program she had been enrolled in following the Queen's intervention. But more importantly, her spirits had soared since that magical morning when the guards had honored her courage. She spoke constantly about her soldier friends and had begun carrying a small notebook where she drew pictures of the guards and wrote letters she hoped to deliver to them someday. It was during one of these improved periods that Emma asked Margaret if they could return to the palace for another visit. The request filled Margaret with both joy and anxiety. Joy at seeing her granddaughter's renewed enthusiasm, and anxiety about whether lightning could strike twice in terms of the extraordinary kindness they had experienced. When they arrived at the palace gates on a crisp October morning, Emma was stronger than she had been in weeks. Her new medication had given her more energy, and her hair had begun to grow back in soft, downy patches under her knitted hat. She clutched her notebook tightly, determined to deliver her drawings and letters to the guards who had made her feel like the bravest soldier in the world. Michael spotted Emma and Margaret from his position before they had even approached the gates. Something in his chest tightened with emotion as he watched the little girl walk with more confidence than she had shown during their last encounter. He used the subtle communication system the guards had developed to alert his colleagues to Emma's presence. And within moments, all 4 guards were acutely aware that their special visitor had returned. Emma approached the gates with obvious excitement, but also with a new sense of purpose. She had spent weeks preparing for this visit, and she had something important to accomplish. Standing as tall as her small frame would allow, she offered her customary salute to each guard, but then did something she had never done before. She spoke loudly enough for them all to hear. "I wrote letters for all of you," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "And I drew pictures of you being the bravest soldiers in the whole world. Grandmama says I should give them to the nice lady at the office, but I want you to know that I made them specially for you." The guards, trained to remain motionless and silent, found themselves in an impossible situation. Every instinct told them to maintain their positions, but every fiber of their being wanted to acknowledge this extraordinary child who had prepared personal gifts for them. The internal struggle was visible to anyone who looked closely. The slight tensing of shoulders, the barely perceptible shift in posture, the way their eyes tracked Emma's movements despite their forward-facing stance. What none of them expected was for Emma to solve their dilemma for them. With the innocent wisdom that children sometimes possess, she walked to each guard's position and carefully placed a folded letter and drawing at their feet. She understood instinctively that they couldn't break position to receive her gifts properly, so she found a way to deliver them that respected their duties while still expressing her gratitude. "You don't have to move," she told Michael as she placed her gift near his boots. "I know you're working very hard to keep everyone safe, but I wanted you to know that you keep me safe too, just by being so brave and strong." The emotional impact of her words hit Michael like a physical blow. Here was a child who understood duty and sacrifice in ways that many adults never would, who had found a way to honor their service while respecting their obligations. The letter at his feet seemed to glow with significance, representing not just a child's gratitude, but a profound recognition of the humanity behind the uniform. As Emma completed her circuit of the guards, placing a personalized gift at each position, palace staff began to take notice of what was happening. Windows that had been empty moments before now framed curious faces, and several staff members found reasons to step outside into the courtyard. The scene had an almost magical quality, a small girl moving between motionless giants, bridging the gap between duty and compassion with simple acts of kindness. The contents of Emma's letters would later be described by the guards as among the most moving documents they had ever received, written in the careful, uneven handwriting of a child who was still learning to form letters properly. Each note contained observations about their service that revealed a depth of understanding far beyond Emma's years. Michael's letter read, in part, "Dear Sergeant Thompson, I know you are the one in charge because you stand the tallest and the other soldiers look at you for signals. Thank you for taking care of your team the same way you take care of everyone else. I hope someone takes care of you too." The simple recognition of his leadership role and the genuine concern for his well-being hit him harder than any commendation he had received in his military career. Sarah's letter contained a drawing of her in full uniform with a note that said, "I told my friends that lady soldiers are just as strong as man soldiers, and you proved it. You make me think I can be anything I want when I grow up, even if I have to be sick first." The acknowledgement of her trailblazing role as a female guard, combined with Emma's determination to overcome her illness, created a powerful connection between two females of vastly different ages but similar strength. James received a letter that asked about his family and included a drawing of what Emma imagined his daughter might look like. "I bet she is proud of you like I am proud of my daddy," Emma had written. "Being away from people you love to help other people is very hard but very brave." The child's understanding of his sacrifice struck directly at the heart of his daily struggle with being separated from his own family. David's letter was perhaps the most poignant of all. "You look young like my big brother who went to university," Emma had written. "Sometimes I see you almost smile when I do my salute, and it makes me feel like maybe I'm doing it right. Thank you for being patient while I learn to be a good soldier like you." Her recognition of his youth and her gratitude for his patient acceptance of her daily attempts at military protocol touched something deep in his chest, but it was the collective effect of these letters that truly overwhelmed the guards. Emma had seen each of them not as interchangeable figures in identical uniforms, but as individual human beings with their own personalities, struggles, and strengths. Her observations were more insightful than those of many career military analysts, yet they came from a place of pure affection and admiration rather than professional evaluation. The afternoon of Emma's letter delivery brought an unexpected visitor to the courtyard. Prince William, having heard about the ongoing relationship between Emma and the guards through palace staff, had arranged his schedule to be present during one of her visits. His appearance in the courtyard sent a ripple of attention through the guards, though their training kept them at their posts. William approached Emma and Margaret with the same warm informality that had made him popular with the public. "You must be Emma," he said, kneeling down to her level much as his grandmother had done weeks earlier. "I've heard wonderful things about your friendship with our guards." Emma's eyes widened with recognition and excitement, but she maintained the composure that had become her trademark. "Are you a prince?" she asked with direct curiosity. When William confirmed his identity, she nodded seriously. "Then you must be very busy protecting people too. Thank you for sharing your soldiers with me." The simplicity of her gratitude and her understanding of shared responsibility moved William deeply. He had been briefed on Emma's condition and her remarkable courage throughout her treatment, but meeting her in person revealed a strength of character that went far beyond what any report could convey. "Actually, Emma," William said, his voice taking on a formal tone that suggested something significant was about to happen, "I was wondering if you might help me with something very important. You see, these guards work very hard every day, and I think they deserve some special recognition. Would you be willing to assist me in presenting them with some honors?" Emma's face lit up with understanding and excitement. The idea of helping to honor her soldier friends was more thrilling than any gift she could have received. "Yes, please," she said seriously. "They are the best soldiers in the whole world, and everyone should know it." What followed was an impromptu ceremony that would become legend within palace circles. William had arranged for a small presentation of service medals to recognize the guards' exemplary dedication, but Emma's presence transformed the routine recognition into something extraordinary. As each guard stepped forward to receive their medal from Prince William, Emma stood at attention beside him, offering her perfect salute to each recipient. The sight of the young prince and the brave little girl working together to honor the guards created a moment of such profound beauty that even the most seasoned palace staff found themselves moved to tears. This was not a staged photo opportunity or a calculated public relations moment. It was a genuine celebration of service, courage, and the bonds that form between people who understand the meaning of dedication. Michael was the first to approach for his medal, and as William pinned the recognition to his tunic, Emma stepped forward with something none of them had expected. She had prepared a small speech, written out in her careful handwriting and practiced with Margaret's help. "Sergeant Thompson," she began, her voice clear despite its youth, "you taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. You do the right thing every day, and that makes you my hero." Her words carried across the courtyard with the weight of absolute sincerity, and Michael felt tears threatening to spill as he accepted both his medal and Emma's tribute. Sarah stepped forward next, and Emma's speech for her was equally thoughtful. "Guard Sarah, you showed me that girls can be just as strong and brave as boys. When I grow up, I want to be strong like you and help protect people too." Sarah had never considered herself a role model, but hearing Emma's words made her realize the impact her presence could have on young girls who needed to see that strength came in all forms. James received his recognition with Emma declaring, "Guard James, you miss your family to take care of all of us. That's the most unselfish thing anyone can do, and your daughter should know that her daddy is a real hero." The acknowledgement of his sacrifice and the assurance that his daughter would understand struck James so deeply that he had to blink rapidly to maintain his composure. When David's turn came, Emma's speech addressed his youth directly. "Guard David, you're not much older than my big brother, but you're already one of the bravest people I know. You prove that you don't have to be old to be important and make a difference." David, who had sometimes struggled with imposter syndrome among his more experienced colleagues, felt a surge of validation that would stay with him throughout his career. But it was what happened after the formal presentations that truly broke through the guards' remaining emotional barriers. Emma, exhausted by the excitement and formality of the ceremony, swayed slightly on her feet. Without hesitation, all 4 guards stepped out of their formation simultaneously, their training momentarily forgotten in the face of genuine concern for the child who had touched their hearts so deeply. Michael reached Emma first, steadying her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Easy there, Private Emma," he said softly, using the honorary title that had become her special designation. "Even the bravest soldiers need to rest sometimes." The breach of protocol was so complete, so instinctive that it took several moments for any of them to realize what they had done. They had abandoned their positions, spoken while on duty, and prioritized a civilian's comfort over their ceremonial obligations. By every rule in their training manual, they should have been facing disciplinary action. Instead, Prince William began to applaud. His clapping was joined by the palace staff who had gathered to witness the ceremony, and soon the entire courtyard echoed with appreciation, not just for the guards' service, but for their humanity. Emma, supported by Michael and surrounded by her soldier friends, clapped weakly but enthusiastically, her face glowing with joy at being the center of such positive attention. "Gentlemen, and lady," William addressed the guards with formal authority but evident warmth. "What we've witnessed today is the highest example of what service really means. You've shown that true duty sometimes requires us to step beyond our prescribed roles to care for others. Your actions today honor not just your uniforms, but the values they represent." The Queen, who had been watching from her private balcony, appeared in the courtyard once again. Her presence caused another stir, but this time the guards remained focused on Emma, their priorities clearly established. "I believe," the Queen said with evident satisfaction, "that we've all learned something important about the difference between following orders and understanding purpose." As the ceremony concluded and Emma was helped to a comfortable seat to recover from the excitement, the guards realized that something fundamental had changed in their understanding of their role. They were still protectors, still guardians of tradition and security, but they had also become something more, living examples of the compassion and humanity that true service requires. 6 months after that transformative ceremony, Emma's health had improved dramatically. The experimental treatment, combined with what her doctors could only describe as a remarkable will to live, had put her cancer into remission. Her hair had grown back in soft curls and her energy had returned to levels that sometimes exhausted Margaret, but filled everyone else with joy. Most importantly, her daily visits to the palace had evolved from desperate attempts to find normalcy into celebrations of life and friendship. The relationship between Emma and the guards had become an unofficial part of palace life. Tour guides would quietly mention the little girl who had captured the hearts of the Queen's Guard, though they never provided details out of respect for Emma's privacy. The guards themselves had learned to incorporate their connection with Emma into their duties, without compromising their effectiveness, finding ways to acknowledge her presence while maintaining the dignity their positions required. Michael had been promoted following a glowing review that specifically mentioned his demonstration of leadership during unusual circumstances. His superiors had initially been concerned about the protocol breaches surrounding Emma's ceremonies, but the Queen's personal intervention had transformed potential disciplinary action into recognition of exceptional service. His ability to balance duty with compassion had become a model for other guards facing similar situations. Sarah had received multiple requests from young women interested in joining the Queen's Guard, many of whom specifically mentioned her as an inspiration. Emma's public declaration of Sarah as a role model had resonated far beyond the palace walls, contributing to a significant increase in female applications for the Guard. Sarah found herself serving as an unofficial mentor to these aspiring guards, a role she embraced with the same dedication she brought to her ceremonial duties. James had been granted extended leave to visit his daughter, with the Queen personally ensuring that his family reunion was everything he had hoped it would be. His daughter had insisted on visiting the palace to meet Emma, resulting in a friendship between the two girls that transcended the distance between them. Their correspondence had become a source of joy for both families and had helped James feel more connected to his daughter despite the demands of his service. David had grown into his role with confidence that his colleagues attributed directly to Emma's early recognition of his worth. The young guard who had once questioned whether he belonged among such distinguished company had become a steady, reliable member of the team, his growth accelerated by the understanding that true strength included vulnerability and genuine care for others. But perhaps the most significant change had occurred in how the guards viewed their relationship with the public, where once they had seen themselves as living statues, impressive but unapproachable, they now understood their role as bridges between the royal family and the people they served. They remained professional, disciplined, and focused on their security duties, but they had learned to carry themselves in ways that reflected the compassion and humanity that Emma had helped them discover. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Other children began to approach the palace with the same confidence Emma had shown, somehow sensing that the guards were not just decorative figures, but real people who cared about their safety and happiness. Parents noticed that their children were less intimidated by the guards and more interested in understanding what they did and why their work was important. On Emma's birthday, which fell on a particularly busy tourist day at the palace, something unprecedented occurred. The Queen had arranged for a small private celebration in one of the palace's less formal reception rooms, inviting Emma, Margaret, and the 4 guards who had become such important figures in her recovery journey. It was the first time in modern memory that active guards had been invited to a personal celebration within the palace walls while off duty. Emma arrived wearing a dress that Margaret had made, specially for the occasion, decorated with tiny embroidered crowns that matched her original knitted hat. She carried herself with a confidence that would have been unimaginable during those first frightening weeks of her illness. But her excitement at seeing her soldier friends in civilian clothes was infectious and delightful. The guards, unaccustomed to interacting with Emma outside their ceremonial roles, discovered that their connection with her transcended their uniforms. Michael found himself sharing stories about his own childhood, while Sarah discussed her plans for encouraging more women to consider military service. James talked about his daughter's letters and his growing understanding of how to balance duty with family relationships. David, no longer the uncertain young man who had questioned his place in the Guard, spoke confidently about his hopes for his future service. But it was Emma who provided the most memorable moment of the celebration. Standing before the group with the poise that had become her trademark, she announced that she had a special presentation to make. From a carefully wrapped package, she produced 4 items that left the Guards speechless with emotion. She had spent months working with Margaret and a local craftsperson to create personalized bookends for each Guard, carved from wood and painted with scenes that reflected their individual personalities and service. Michael's featured a sergeant's stripe surrounded by symbols representing leadership and guidance. Sarah's showed a female figure in uniform standing strong against a mountainous background. James's depicted a soldier reading a letter with a distant castle, representing home and family. David's showed a young Guard standing confident and tall, with symbols of growth and potential surrounding the figure. These are so you can remember that being a soldier is about more than just standing still, Emma explained as she presented each gift. It's about growing and learning and caring about people. You taught me that, and now I want you to remember it even when you're at home. The Guards accepted their gifts with emotions they no longer tried to hide. The bookends would become treasured possessions, displayed prominently in their homes as reminders of how a brave little girl had taught them that true strength includes tenderness, that real courage encompasses compassion, and that the highest form of service involves opening your heart to others. As the celebration concluded, the Queen made a final observation that would stay with all of them. "What we've witnessed over these months," she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of decades of service, "is proof that the most important traditions are not the ceremonies we preserve, but the human connections we create." Emma has reminded us all that duty and love are not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of a life well lived. Years later, when Emma had grown into a strong, healthy young woman who would eventually pursue her own career in public service, she would often return to visit the Guards at Buckingham Palace. The original 4 had long since retired or moved on to other assignments, but the tradition they had helped establish, of seeing the humanity in duty and the strength in vulnerability, had become part of the culture of the Queen's Guard. The tourists who visited the palace continued to see Guards standing at attention, with perfect discipline and unwavering focus, but those who looked more carefully, who stayed long enough to really observe, sometimes caught glimpses of something more: the slight softening around the eyes when children approached, the almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement when someone offered a respectful greeting, the sense that beneath those famous red tunics beat hearts that understood the true meaning of service.